I don't even know who you are!
Oh, you don't?
There are only about a handful of characters who can go toe-to-toe with the Viltrumite in the Invincible universe, and one of these individuals is an unassuming, one-eyed extraterrestrial with an equally unassuming name, Alan the Alien. Before we begin and tell you everything you need to know about Alan, there are major spoilers ahead. The birth of Alan the Alien. Alan hails from the planet Unopa, a planet that, like most others in the Invincible universe, become a target of the Viltrumite Empire. This ultimately resulted in its native population become driven to near extinction after they rebelled against the superpowered agents of Viltrum. And by the time Alan the Alien was born, his home planet had become far from the once idyllic place it was. You see, Alan was born inside a breeding camp, much like all the other Unopans, after they failed insurgents against the Viltrumite Empire. Now that sounds like a depressing place to be thrown into, but wait until you hear this. That same Unopan breeding camp also served as a laboratory where infant Unopans are experimented on. This program was led by an exiled Viltrumite named Thetis, who himself opposed his empire's brutal expansionism, and it's a measure he took in hopes of finding a way to engineer a creature that can stand against the ruthless warriors of the empire. Scores upon scores of Unopan babies would ultimately die during these experiments. That is until Alan came along. He was the only Unopan to survive the breeding camp's many procedures, but by no means was he considered a success, since Alan, albeit being a little bit more physically powerful and resilient than his fellow Unopans, still couldn't remotely match the power levels of an average Viltrumite. In the end, Thetis shut down the Unopan breeding program, deeming it a failure, and as for Alan, he was given a job as the champion evaluation officer for the Coalition of Planets, a collective Thetis found to rally the universe to a single cause, defeating the Viltrumite Empire. Alan, the agent. His time as an evaluation officer would find Alan frequently visiting Earth, where you'd have numerous run-ins with Omni-Man as part of his duties. It goes without saying that no one knew about Omni-Man's plans to conquer Earth in the name of Viltrum at the time. Alan would also eventually meet and become close allies with Mark Grayson. Not only that, but Alan would find himself with a loving girlfriend named Telia. His relationship with Mark started during one of his fateful business trips to Earth as an evaluation officer. This was extremely good news for the Coalition's intergalactic rebels, as Mark Grayson was one of the few only known individuals at the time who had nearly the same power levels as a Viltrumite. The Coalition would finally have an ace up their sleeve if he joined them. This was cause for celebration, so Alan immediately reported it to Thetis and the Coalition's higher-ups before meeting with Telia and going out on a date. Little did he know that the agents of the Viltrumite Empire were hot on his heels. The superpowered colonizers ambushed Alan in the middle of his date with Telia and nearly killed him. Left for dead afterwards, Thetis would retrieve Alan the Alien's dying body and put him in a stasis. Now this is where things become a lot more interesting for Invincible's resident evaluation officer, Alan, Emergent. Alan would ultimately regain consciousness after months of dormancy, and he and Thetis would ultimately discover that there was a latent mutation that occurred in his body as a result of the experiments he underwent during his youth. As a result, Alan's power levels, from his durability to his physical strength, would become comparable to a Viltrumite after it adapted to a near life-ending beatdown he took from the agents months before. In a way, you can look at Alan as having the same powers as DC Comics' Doomsday. The more he gets beaten, the stronger he gets. Thetis would then reveal his entire deal to Alan about how he betrayed the Viltrumite Empire years ago due to their tyrannical ways, and most notably, how he was the one responsible for almost driving the Viltrumites to extinction using a virus he crafted from his own genes. Ultimately, Thetis would give Alan the order to become his direct subordinate, as the Coalition founder believed that there was a spy within the Coalition. And of course, there was their ultimate goal to fully draft Invincible to their cause. Alan, ever the stand-up Coalition agent, then headed back to Earth to try to convince Mark to commit to the Coalition's cause. However, he was immediately intercepted by the Immortal just as he entered the planet's orbit. They'd have a bit of a scuffle, but Invincible would clear things up and allow cooler heads to prevail. Alan would then have a chat with Mark. He would tell him that his father, no Nolan Grayson, aka Omni-Man, had been branded as a traitor to the Empire after failing to take over Earth and had now been taken prisoner. Ultimately, their conversation resulted in Mark rejecting Alan and the Coalition's offer. There's a silver lining though, as Invincible told his friend Alan that should push come to shove with the Empire, they can count on him to join the fray. After that, the Unopan agent would fly back to Telescria, his and the Coalition's base of operations. This is when he chanced upon a Viltrumite prison ship somewhere in deep space. One of the Viltrumites on board then rushes towards Alan and attacks him, but unlike before, he was able to now trade blows with this agent. But Alan had other plans. Instead of getting into a fist fight, realizing that the prison ship is the same one where Omni-Man was being held, Alan purposely lost this fight so that he could be taken to the same spacecraft and help Omni-Man escape. Alan would successfully locate Nolan inside the prison ship, and they'd eventually grow close as they start to talk about their personal matters, such as Alan's own romantic woes or how Nolan misses his wife on Earth. In time, Alan would be able to enact his plan of saving Omni-Man. Just as Nolan was about to be executed, the Unopan caused a riot to break out inside of the prison ship to divert the Viltrumites' attention and mask their escape. Alan was even able to gain an ally in the form of another prisoner during the debacle, Battle Beast, a powerful feline extraterrestrial warrior who was once an enemy of Earth's Guardians of the Globe. Battle Beast was also one of the rare individuals in the Invincible universe who has enough strength to defeat a full-blooded Viltrumite, which he did during their escape before seemingly freezing in the vacuum of space. Nolan and Alan would successfully make their way back to Telescria, where the ex-superhero would bunk at Alan and Talia's home. There, Thetis would successfully draft Nolan into the Coalition's cause, where he and the Unopan would be in charge of garnering warriors in hopes of mounting an offensive against the Viltrumite Empire. Alan and the Viltrumite War. Nolan and Alan would successfully recruit quite a few individuals who they deemed strong enough to face against the Viltrumites, such as the infamous Space Raider and his asteroid-destroying gun, the Ragnar's race of the feral reptilian aliens who have the jaws that could pierce even a Viltrumite's skin, and even got Battle Beast into the fold when the Coalition rescues him from deep space. He and Nolan would head for Earth to add more superheroes like Tech Jacket, Oliver Grayson, another one of Nolan's sons, and Invincible himself to the Coalition army's ranks. With the preparations complete, the Coalition was ready to mount their offensive right at the heart of the Empire on the planet Viltrum. However, their plans were almost foiled when Viltrumite agents ambushed the Coalition on Telescria, all thanks to the traitor in their midst. Alan and his newfound Coalition army fend off the Viltrumites and make the would-be invaders retreat. Sometime later, they finally decide to take the fight to the Empire and head for Viltrum. The Viltrumites ambush Alan and the rest of the Coalition army on the way, ultimately resulting in the death of Thetis at the hands of Thrag, the Viltrumite Empire's Grand Regent. Alan would then be named the new leader of the Coalition of Planets. At this point, the Viltrumites had already struck a deal with Nolan and Invincible to stay on Earth and interbreed with humans to replenish their population. But Alan doesn't agree with this. He plans on unleashing an improved version of Thetis' virus, which he discovered the former Coalition left him, to finally put an end to the Empire and the Viltrumite race. Nolan thinks it's a bad plan and thinks that Alan would inadvertently cause an all-out war on Earth if he unleashed the virus, so the two get into a bit of a scuffle. Mark also arrives on the scene to try and convince Alan to stop himself from releasing the virus, but the Unopan wouldn't listen. In the middle of this debacle, even Grand Regent Thrag arrives and threatens to kill Alan. The Coalition leader wasn't afraid though, and he threatened to release the virus should Thrag try to harm him. Ultimately, Alan and Thrag would reach a truce. Alan, the anti-hero. Some time would pass with a truce between Thrag and Alan, and by extension, the Viltrumite Empire and the Coalition. However, the Unopan would eventually learn that Nolan had assumed leadership of the Viltrumites and had exiled Thrag. Alan took this opportunity to forget about their old ceasefire and order Battle Beast to assassinate the former Grand Regent. Shortly after, Alan would welcome Mark, Eve, and their daughter Tara to Telescria, where the Graysons would migrate and stay indefinitely. Alan would learn that Battle Beast had finally located the exiled Thrag and is in the middle of his assassination mission. Believing that sending Battle Beast alone would be enough to end Thrag, Alan successfully enlists Mark and Oliver into helping him complete the mission. But this would all amount to nothing. Alan, after the time skip, Mark Grayson would go on a time-traveling, dimension-spanning adventure, and he'd end up returning to his original timeline after 5 years. In the interim, he'd find out that Alan was still in a deadlock against Thrag. Even worse, one of his former Coalition generals, Ilya, had become become so disgruntled at his inability to put an end to Thrag that she decided to assassinate Alan with a bomb strapped to herself during a public event he was attending. Alan would ultimately survive this and get another boost to his physique, thanks to his adaptive abilities, and life would go on for the Unopan leader of the Coalition of Planets. By the end of this series, however, Alan would experience an extreme personality shift. Back when he and Mark Grayson first met, Alan the alien was this proactive, lovable rebel who stood against the tyranny of the Viltrumite Empire. As the years passed though, while Mark himself ascended the Viltrumite throne after Nolan's death and successfully turned them into an undeniable force for good, Alan had become an absolute bureaucrat. During his long tenure as its leader, Alan lost sight of what the Coalition of Planets originally stood for and turned it into something similar to the very thing that he originally set out to oppose, a heartless organization whose sole purpose is to expand their interests. This would ultimately cause Mark and Alan's years-long friendship to sour as the two gradually drifted apart. In fact, Alan confronted Mark about his exploits. He believed that what the new Emperor and his fellow Viltrumites were doing, saving other planets and rescuing them from various threats, made his organization look bad, that planets were leaving the Coalition en masse because they were becoming too self-sufficient. Mark then told Alan that maybe that's for the better, that there wasn't any need for a coalition anymore, considering that it's become a self-serving institution that regularly siphoned resources from smaller planets to feed their own organization. Hearing this, Alan would try to directly oppose what Mark and the Viltrumites are doing. He mounted an offensive against them, which ultimately resulted in the Coalition's sound defeat. In the end, Mark would convince Alan to dissolve the Coalition.